Okay, before I send you off to do your assignment, let's just do a couple of sketches. So these are exactly the same as sketches we did before. I just thought it might be good for people to watch me go through all the steps again. So what we have is a thing here. The first thing we're going to notice is this cosine function. Okay, so that's important to notice. Don't sketch the sine function with this, sketch the cosine function. Next, we're going to go through and find the amplitude, period, phase shift, and everything else. So the amplitude is found right here. Again, I see that's in a negative, but the amplitude is just a positive number. The fact that it's negative does tell me that it's flipped. So when I graph that, that's definitely going to have to play into it. But right now, it's just, the amplitude is just 4, or 1/4. Okay, period. The period, I'm going to check to see if there's any k value. There's no k value, or at least it's a k value of 1, which means the period is your normal one. It's just 2 pi over 1, or just 2 pi. Right, 2 pi over k, and k is just 1. So the period is just 2 pi, so that's good news. Next, we're going to look inside the function again for any movements left or right, called the phase shift. This one I see a negative pi over 6, which means I'm going to have to move to the right pi over 6. It's opposite to what I think. Minus actually means that I move to the right. And then finally I look at the end and see that I have a +2 at the end. So that talks about my vertical translation, and that moves up 2. So there's all the information I need. Now I'm going to go about trying to sketch this. Of course, we've talked about a number of times about this, about picking an appropriate scale. Because the screen is blank here, we get to pick any scale we want. We want to pick something that's going to be easy to do. So I notice that the period is 2 pi, so I got to make sure that I have at least 2 pi. I don't need to change much there. But I do know, looking ahead, that I'm going to have to move it right pi over 6. So I got to make sure that it's easy to move it right pi over 6. If I choose a scale of like thirds, pi over 6 is just going to be a small shift. So I think if I do this correctly, I should be able to do each tick in pi over 6s. So this would be 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6, 5 pi over 6. This would be 6 pi over 6 at pi. And then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 pi over 6 is 2 pi. So that looks like it's working out really well. It should be something that's appropriate. I also have to pick my y values. The amplitude here is pretty small. It's only 1/4. So I can't, if I pick something like 1, 2, 3, a quarter is going to be pretty tiny on my screen. So that's not going to be appropriate. I want to pick something that's reasonable. But I also have to notice that I'm moving up 2. So I can't do something like this. Like I can't go 1, 2, 3, 4 and say 1, and then this is a quarter, right? This would be a quarter, which would help with my amplitude. But the problem is, of course, I'm going to move up 2. So if I move up from 2 here, it's going to take me off of the axis. So what I need to do is pick something that's somewhere in between. I think if I go by half ticks, so just go every second one. So a half and then 1, a half and then 2, a half and then 3. A quarter would be half of that. And that'll give me enough room to move up and down. So -1, -2, -3. So I'm pretty happy with that scale, and I think I'd be set to start sketching. So as with most of my sketches, I think I'm going to start with the original and then do the adjustments as needed. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw an original cosine. So cosine starts at 0, ends at 2 pi, or sorry, it doesn't start at 0, it starts at 1, ends at 1 at the end. Halfway through, it's down at its lowest point at -1, so halfway, of course, is pi. Halfway between 0 and pi is pi over 2, and it's back to 0. And halfway between pi and 2 pi is right there at 0, and I have my original cos curve. This is really important to have that as a measuring stick for everything else, because sometimes the period and the phase shift, or sorry, the scale you pick really changes how the graph looks. So having that original there to make a comparison is really important. Okay, so I've lightly drawn the cosine curve. What I'm going to do now is redraw it, but I'm going to draw it with the amplitude in mind and the fact that it's flipped. So the amplitude tells me that it's only going to go up a quarter. So it would sort of start here, end here. Instead of going all the way down to 1, it's going to only go down to a quarter. The zeros are still going to be the same. So that would be an amplitude of 1/4, really, really skinny graph. But I've also noticed that it's flipped. Okay, it's flipped because of the negative. So I'm going to do all of that, except I'm going to flip it at the same time. So instead of being amplitude of 1/4, it's going to be amplitude down here is 1/4, so it's going to be negative. So it's going to start here. After a full cycle, it'll finish at the same spot. Again, halfway, it's going to be right in this little pi thing right there. Oh, sorry, not in the negatives, it'll be up here in the positives because it's flipped. The zeros will stay the same. It'll go through here and here because those aren't affected by the amplitude. And then I have this really skinny cosine curve that looks something like that. So properties, let's draw it lightly. So it's a slight sketch. And I hope you'll agree that that is one with a quarter the amplitude and flipped upside down. I'm going to take that gray curve and move it. Where does it move? Well, it moves right 1 and up 2. So each of these points is going to move right 1. So this little point is going to move right 1 up 2. So 1, 2, it's going to start right there. Oh, wait, I just did a mistake that kids make all the time. So I'm just going to rate that. I moved up 2, but I only moved up 2 ticks. Okay? We got to move up a scale of 2. So here it is. I got to move up a scale of 2. A scale of 2 is 2 ticks. Or sorry, a bunch of ticks, 4 ticks. So here's up 1, 2 ticks. Up 2 is going to put me up there. Okay? So, and then move it to the right. So it's going to start right there. Another way you can imagine it is this. If it was at 0, let's pretend it was at 0. How would you move up 2? Well, here's up 2. It's 4 ticks. This is just below 0. It starts just below 0, so this should be just below 2. Okay. And it's moved over to the right. That's why it starts here. The finishing point is going to go from here. It's going to move up 2, so up 1, up 2 again, just below the 2, and it's going to move over to the right. So there we go. The middle term, up 2, so it's going to be just above the 0, so now it's going to be just above the 2. Oh, and moved over to the right. The zeros, they're going to move up 2 and over to the right. So up 1, up 2, and over to the right is going to put it right there. Again, I don't need that written stuff, so I'm just going to erase it and do that by my hand. And there's the 0. And the next 0 is up and over, and it ends up being there. So then I have this as my final curve. Okay.